All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone here. My name is Scott Webb. I am a Associate Director of Career Advising and Employer Relations at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. So I'm out here on the foggy west coast of California right now. I've been an advisor here at MIS for 10 years. Prior to that, I was an international development professional. I've been a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. I've worked for International Relief and Development. Now they're Bluemont. I've worked for Relief International. And then I finally ended my international development career, at least that iteration, with Catholic Relief Services, where I was a technical advisor for emergency human resources. So I've been a recruiter twice. I've hired about 100 people end to end. And I've been advising students here at the Middlebury Institute for 10 years. So this event, it's the International Development Panel. It's the final event in the NASPAA DC Career Virtual Trek. NASPAA is a National Association of Schools of Public Policy and Public Administration. And my colleagues and I on the Employer Relations Committee have traditionally scheduled a DC Career Exploration Week, which turns into a DC Career Exploration Month, basically, usually around October. So anyway, I'm really excited for this panel today. We've got three really cool panelists that have agreed to join us today kindly. I have with us, because I want to see your bios and titles. So yeah, I've got Patrick Williams. He's a food security specialist with FuseNet. That's a famine early warning system. Prior to that, he was with USAID, and prior to that, Catholic Relief Services and Peace Corps. I've got Julie Montgomery. Julie, I've known a long time. She spent many, many years with Interaction, which is an association of American nonprofits working in international development and humanitarian response. She parlayed that to a good long run, with the Society for International Development, where she worked for several years as the VP of membership. And now she is the Director of Membership Engagement and Strategy with the Women's Funding Network. And finally, we've got David Smith. He's the president of the Forage Center for Peace Building and Humanitarian Education. And he is a lawyer by training and has done a bunch of other really interesting work, mostly in the peace building space. And he's also been an adjunct professor in and around the DC area. So a couple of housekeeping things. I've got the chat on. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in there. I'll be putting some other interesting links in there, hopefully as my colleagues are talking. But if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat and I will try and pay attention and queue it up. So I'll let all the panelists talk about themselves for a few minutes, and then we can just kind of go in and just have a free discussion. So let's start with, I think we agreed, Pat. So yeah, tell me, Pat, tell us a little bit about your career and the journey and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Hey everyone, good afternoon. First off, with all careers, it's never a straight line. I know we all grew up like, oh, we'll work a job and then we'll retire one day. It has not been a straight line at all. I studied psychology and geographic information systems at the University of Maryland, but I wanted to be a lawyer, applied to law school, was about to go and said, actually, I just go join the Peace Corps. So I joined the Peace Corps, went to Burkina Faso for 3 years. Someone just logged in, your microphone is open. And then I went to, after Peace Corps, 3 years, I went to grad school for public health informatics. I thought I really liked public health, but I knew I liked measuring things. So I was thinking monitoring and evaluation. And that lasted for a little bit. I joined CRS, Catholic Relief Services, as a fellow, which is kind of like an entry level position. And then from there, I ended up staying with CRS for a few years before joining USAID as a foreign service officer, in which case I was with the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance based out of Bangladesh. And then the whole development humanitarian sector blew up. And now I was forced to move back from Bangladesh to DC. And I'm in DC working with the FuseNet right now as a food security analyst. And so I've had the pleasure being based in Burkina Faso, Niger, Ghana, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, India, Laos, Bangladesh. I've kind of worked all over the place. But I will say more recently, right now, I've been focusing on pivoting. I think like many of you are thinking about what does the next step of the career look like? What does the next step of this field, this sector look like? And so for me personally, and we'll get into this a little bit later, I'm going all in on kind of creative finance, more transactional assistance, and then strong private sector engagement. And so I'm specifically diving into blockchain, not necessarily cryptocurrency, blockchain, and kind of figuring out how to use creative technology to finance humanitarian development stuff. And so that's the pivot. And let me stop there and turn it over to the next panelist to introduce themselves.
Right on. Thanks, Pat. Um, let's see. Let me switch the pin up.
Right.
Julie, tell us about
Yes.
what you're up to. You've
Hi,
had such a journey.
everyone. Yeah,
Yeah.
so thanks first for having me here. It's such a pleasure to see familiar faces online. And thanks to those that are taking the time to join us today. So as Scott mentioned, well, I am currently the Director of Membership Engagement and Strategy. I am new to this position at the Women's Funding Network. I just joined a couple weeks ago, so I am learning, quickly learning about the organization. But I started off my career, so I studied sociology and psychology. Did my master's at the University of Florida, studying on focusing on race, class, gender. And then started Interaction, which Scott mentioned, and this was many years ago, like 20 something years ago. Started Interaction working on gender mainstreaming work. So it really kind of, I was able to apply, even though I didn't do international development at that time, there really wasn't anything like that. I was able to apply my studies towards a program at Interaction called the Commission on the Advancement of Women. And Interaction, as Scott mentioned, is a coalition of US-based NGOs working on international development and humanitarian response. So they are a membership organization convener. That is my, kind of like my bread and butter. I love working in networks and alliances and associations, and that is what I have done my entire career. So I'm a little bit unique in that sense, but I'm hoping for me being here as a resource to you all is that in doing the work that I do, I have met a lot of people. I know a lot about a lot of different kinds of organizations. And as we'll talk more, just making connections and meeting people and reaching out to people is really key as you enter into this sector. But basically going back to Interaction, I worked on a lot of different things. After gender, I kind of, as Scott mentioned, I was there for many years. And so I worked in gender, moved around the organization, worked on different projects and grants. Worked in their communications team. I worked in on food security and agriculture in East Africa. Did work around open data and transparency and sharing information about what the sector or what NGOs do around the world. And then I moved over to SID US about 7 years ago and led their membership team. And that organization, also a membership, as I said, it's a membership organization, but that is kind of it's an organization that encompasses all kinds of different organizations working in this sector. So it's whether you're working at a university, working for a big corporation, there are NGOs or small businesses, think tanks, for-profits, nonprofits. It's like essentially any person and organization interested in this sector can be a part of that network. And that network really is all about convening the community to connect, share, and learn. And so now fast forward where I am now, as I said, I joined about a month ago. Now I work for the Women's Funding Network, which is, for me, it's kind of like full circle. I'm going back to my roots in a way, because now I work for this network that does focus on, as the name would entail, on women and gender equity programs, domestically and internationally. So it's a coalition of women's funds, feminist funds, other allies and individuals that are supporting gender equity. It is a little different in the sense that, Interaction did a lot of advocacy and programming. SID did not. It was just more of a convener. And I feel like this new organization kind of bridges both of those types of previous experience that I've had at the other organizations. And but now it's more on the donor side. So I've kind of shifted to the philanthropy side of things. I've always been on the implementer side of things, and so now I'm on the other side. So that's been interesting. So anyway, here that's my story.
That's great. Really appreciate that. Let me bring everyone back in. The pin. Cool. And for me. So I you know, the international development
Do we
community
want
has just
David
been.
to speak, introduce himself?
Oh yeah, David. That's right. It's David's turn.
That's
Yes,
fine.
please.
Scott, thanks for inviting me. That's
I was
great.
jumping ahead so much. I was like, I want to hear
No,
from, yeah, I have so much
we
to,
want
I
to
have
hear.
so many
We want to hear from
questions.
everybody here,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
So
Please.
I'm pleased to be asked to be here. Thanks, Scott, and,
Yeah.
and Pat. And I've worked with Julie before. One of the things that I think is striking a little bit about our panel, and I'm going to I'm going to push this a little bit, is that maybe we're generational in a sense. I'm don't have much hair, but I'm at the I've been in working for 40 years. I haven't been in the development, peace building, humanitarian space though for probably about 20 years. So I've already done a lot of pivoting in my career. Right now, I'm president of the Forge Center for Peace Building Humanitarian Education that does humanitarian education training. Um, I really look at this development humanitarian peace nexus, which I think a lot of you all operate within that too. It's hard for us to say, well, this is humanitarian, this is development, and this is peace building. It's all really together. Um, Probably where I've had the most interaction though with this community is that for 16 years I've been teaching at the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution, which not doesn't produce as many international development graduates as maybe GW does, but probably a good 10-15% of my students have ended up at USAID and places like that over the years. So I've been working with them the last year or so. I also do some career coaching, but this experience of what everyone is having is very personal to me, and I imagine it's personal to Scott and Julie because and Pat and Julie and Scott because of their own connections. But I have a lot of friends. I live in Washington D.C. My friends were USAID or DAI or Commodix, those folks who took the buyout or didn't take the buyout or furloughed. So there's been a lot of hardship conversations. It's very personal because I have a son who works for the EPA, still works for the EPA as of this morning. He hasn't been furloughed. He works on Superfund, but he actually has a very similar story to Pat in that he went University of Maryland, then went into the Peace Corps, taught in Namibia, and then came back to the EPA, which EPA is one agency where you throw a rock and you're going to hit 10 Peace Corps volunteers at EPA, just one of those agencies. So this is all hits home, and it's very much personal of what's going on. Um, what I would say, and I'll stop there, is that I would say how this affecting you and the strategies you develop in a way is very idiosyncratic, right, based on where you are. But what I'm finding is if you're 28, 38, 48, and 58, it's different, right? I deal with a lot of 28-year-olds, my own students, and you will pivot. You will find something. You will land. You will figure it out. You will come back to the field in 4 or 5 years if you pivot out of it. There's a lot of hope for you. It may involve your moving out of Washington. I've seen a lot of my students say, I just talking to a student the other day who was at USAID. He went home to Buffalo and now is getting a job with the local government in Buffalo. So it's a lot of that. 38, 48, it's different. 58, it's very different. And so I'm dealing with a lot of that. If you've been at USAID for 30 years, you've got a spouse, you've got 2 kids in college, you've got a house in Arlington, and all of a sudden you're out of work, it's hitting you in a very different way. And the options are very different there. So one of the things to think about is that there's not one size fits all in how we respond to what's going on and the pathways that are taking because of where people are sitting. So we want to make sure that we take that in consideration. I'll stop there and hopefully I can add something else as we go through the conversation. But thanks, Scott.
Thanks, David. Yeah, sorry I was skipping ahead a little bit. I love what you're saying. And I appreciate that you noticed the sort of generational thing. You know, we have a little bit of a continuum, and I'm seeing that as well. Um, I immediately was incredibly stressed out about the international development system and the community because, you know, I've spent the last 10 years getting my students and into places where, you know, a year ago I could call up 4 or 5 different former connections at different, you know, NGOs and be like, I need someone to get an, you know, can you help my student with an internship? You know, my alumni were well placed all around the world doing all kinds of cool jobs. And, you know, just over and over again in like March, April, May, like open to work posts, open to work post, open to work post. But I noticed something else though, is that just the international development community, like everyone started just like using their incredible skills to help each other. You know, I feel like the network has really come together to help each other. There's many people, you know, that are like former USAID people or other NGO people who are posting things, you know, people like the first name that comes to mind is Wayne Voda and his like career pivot. That's a big one. That's a huge resource. You know, we can share that. There's another guy whose name I'm blanking on right now. It'll come to me, but he's former USAID. He spent weeks putting together using AI all these like pivot documents for how to translate USAID speak into private sector speak. And so there's that initial shock, right? Of everyone's like, oh my God, what do we do? You know, and there's all of a sudden thousands of highly underemployed or highly experienced underemployed international development professionals at all levels looking for all the same jobs at the same time. And so everyone's jumping on, you know, the same kinds of jobs at various different, you know, local nonprofits, foundations, UN funded agencies, anything, you know, that is remotely related or tangential. And so it's like, God, what happened? So I have so many questions, right? Because what can you do moving forward? You know, if you're at, you know, this level in this technical area, like what are the prospects of you know, what does an international development career possibly look like now? You know, do people pivot and do something else and then just get into whatever they're doing, like a local nonprofit type job? Like they translate all the skills in mission driven program management and design into, you know, something that's based here in the United States or wherever they live. And then there's that. Or, you know, is there a realistic path to doing, you know, those cool, you know, like the kinds of things that Pat was able to do, you know, in West Africa with CRS? I mean, that used to be like the dream career for pretty much any international development student that came through. So, Pat, I wanted to ask you, like, you did your job, you know, with CRS, you were on that path. Like many people in that space, you know, you saw a path where you go like, wow, I could work for the donor, you could work for USAID, you know, and you think, okay, foreign service officer with USAID, that used to be just like, that's as great of an outcome as I could have possibly imagined for my students, if I'm being honest. It's like you take that path, you know, you work for a premier NGO, you get really good field experience, then you go work for USAID where you get to shape, you know, the narrative and things like that. But like, so I have a few questions for you on that. Like, what was the job search like in moving this in this direction? How were you able to secure this opportunity with FuseNet, which, you know, used to be a USAID project, now it's something else? And I mean, also, you know, you're like you said at the beginning of our call before we started recording, you know, you're working in the Chemonics building, which, you know, is a building built on a $9 billion supply chain project that ended not too long ago. You know, what has this been like for you, this whole transition?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, it's been a little bit traumatic, I think, for most people in the field. I think whether you're in your early 20s, 30s, 40s, wherever, it's been a bit traumatic because so many people have been making plans and have we've grown really attached to this work. We're really passionate. It's a labor of love for most of us. We don't do this work for the paycheck. You do it because it means something to you. You're passionate about food security. You're passionate about gender protection, whatever it may be, peace building. And so it's been really traumatic first off. And so I'm going to the job search. I was in Bangladesh with USAID, and then of course we got the stop work order, and it was one of those things where you can't go into the embassy, you can't go into the mission. What the heck do you do? And so there's a group of us that just kind of came together and we said, hey, every day we're going to try to submit 2 job applications and reach out to 2 contacts just to say, hey, what's up. And so that started back in March. I didn't start this current position until September. So that was a few months of just applying, and reaching out to people. And one thing I will say, I mean, I must have submitted probably 100, 150 applications. I don't think any of them made a difference. I think my secret that I would give to anybody is just to reach out, speak to people, go to networking events, join a forum, join some kind of professional organization, and just use your connections, because there's so many people applying for positions right now, people who are in some ways overqualified, who have all this experience, and you're all trying to use ChatGPT or Lime to tweak your resume to submit it to another AI bot that's going to tell you whether or not you're a good fit for this position. It's so, I don't want to say impersonal, but I mean, it's so much easier just to reach out to a person, whether that's through LinkedIn. I've been working at Chemonics now, FuseNet, and I've been posting jobs online. People reach out to me, say, "Hey, I saw Chemonics is hiring for this position. Could I just learn about the position? Can I learn more?" And most of the time, I say yes, and I connect with people. I connect people to resources, and that's, I mean, in my opinion, maybe the other panelists would say something different, but the best way to get a job these days is to network. And for those of you who're saying, I'm just in school or I'm just graduating, I don't have a network, cold call people on LinkedIn, reach out to Scott, reach out to me, reach out to David. I mean, we're all here. And the nice thing about this community is that it's very open, it's very warm, lots of warm, fuzzy feelings, in the sense that we're always willing to help each other, we're always willing to come together as a community. Um, and then one piece that I wanted to end on here is, for me, I found that the people who are most successful navigating pivots or navigating this kind of shift are those T-shaped people. When I say T-shaped, they have like a technical specialization that they're really good at, but then they're also able to cover a lot of other things. And so
Yeah, deep
for me,
experience, T being
deep,
deep experience in one thing, and then like a little bit of
yes,
experience in others. Yeah, I like that.
exactly. So
Yeah.
just go across. And so for me personally, my background's in data science, informatics. I've done public health, I've done peace building, I've done education. I was humanitarian assistance in Bangladesh, and now I'm doing food security. But my technical specialty is data science, data informatics, indicators, monitoring, and then it allows me to do other things. And so I've seen that with other people who have been successful, they have that similar profile. And I'll stop there, Scott. I hope I answered that question, but
You did. I'm real curious on your back to your application process, applying to all those places. To what extent did you get attention from any organizations outside of the development space? And how did you adapt your applications for those kinds of employers?
yeah, so this is a really hard question because I applied for so many. I would say it by the time September rolled around, I applied to 150 positions. I gotten maybe 7 or 8 interviews. All right. And of the 7 or 8, I'll say 4 of them were outside of the development sector. And the way I parlayed those, I focused really heavily on my data science and informatics background. I really went and said, hey, I'm all about return on investment. If you look around the world right now, everything's a bit more transactional, everything's a bit more private sector engagement. So if you can demonstrate a return on investment and actually communicate that return on investment, even if you're a strategy person, say, hey, I developed a strategy or I led strategy development that contributed to this return on investment or did this, whatever, demonstrate that impact, that return on investment. And that's what really got me in the door with a few other non-sector groups. And then with FuseNet, it's more analysis, data. I could kind of wing that, and it worked out really nicely. I was incredibly blessed and lucky, but I do think being T-shaped, but also focusing on return on investment and being able to really communicate some significant outcomes.
Can I piggyback
Yeah,
on something?
David, please. Yeah, it looked like you wanted to jump
Because
in.
I had a conversation last week. We at the Ford Center, we have these conversations, and I spent an hour talking to the Handicap International Country Director in Ukraine, who I've known. And he said to me, one is the sector has collapsed by 50%. So it's everywhere. but he said there are no more project manager jobs. What you have to do is you have to get a job as a nutritionist, as a tech person, right? That's that T. That is, you really need to focus on a specific skill set rather than coming in to learn as you go. They don't want you learning as you go anymore. They want you to come in and be this particular person. At least is that what he's telling me where he is, and they would hire you. So that's that deep T that I think Pat is talking about. I'm not saying that project management is not important, but a lot of the fields that we've talked about and dealt with all these years, peace building and all this, it's kind of like I can do a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. I'm not so sure if that's going to cut it right now.
Man, it's hard to hear that if I'm being honest, because like I spent many years, translating what I was hearing from many of the other development players that like they wanted highly adaptable generalists, so like monitoring, evaluation, project design, those fundamentals. You could be a program officer or a program manager of any kind of sector, and there will be those technical specialists with the big T, that are highly knowledgeable about those things. So yeah, that's
I mean,
frustrating.
I'm shocked too, David, that you said that, because I've
Evidence
always thought the
assumption.
generalist and having a skill set, like the things that you can, not being a technical expert in a specific thing, but things that you can, whether it's fundraising, whether it's data analysis, whether it's writing or communications, those are kind of these general things. I mean, maybe
Well, those
that's not
aren't,
what you think of it.
they're
Or do you
not.
see those as technical?
No, I see
No?
that as technical
Yeah,
fundraising,
you
for
do?
instance. Everybody's hiring fundraising. I went through my
Yeah,
LinkedIn. I couldn't tell you how many people were hiring fundraising. That's technical work, right?
yeah.
I mean, that is, and that's keeping
I guess,
the lights
yeah,
on. It's the
yeah.
jobs that keep the lights on are jobs that people are looking for. If you don't have a job that keeps the lights on, I
Agreed.
don't
I
know if
agree on
there's
that for
space for you.
sure.
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess what I was thinking about is sort of in my, because I've always said, oh yeah, I'm a generalist and I can do all these different things. I've had to do that because at least in my experience, when you are a project manager or a grant manager or whatever, at least the interaction, there was always a fundraising component. I had to go work with donors. I had to go write proposals. I had to go get money, and then I had to implement, so it's kind of, it required all those things. But to your point, David, around money and, you know, SID US, we're a very small nonprofit, and, it was clear, I don't know, we maybe had 6 people, 7 people on staff, and we had to lay off. And I mean, essentially, the decision came down to who brings in revenue, who brings in revenue and has the potential to bring in revenue, as a part of their job. And what are the things at the very minimum the organization needs to run, and who does that? So it was kind of these twofold. It's like, what's the mission of the organization at the very core, and who makes money doing it, and so we had to lay off people. I mean, luckily I was not one of those people. I mean, I've left, but I was not one of those people, because that's what I do. I like raise money for the organization, and it's a membership organization, membership's core. But I wanted to go back to Pat's point around networking, and I know you've all probably have heard this, but it really does. Right now the market is so saturated, that networking is really important. I do think the number of applications you put in when you're like at that point, like even for internships, if you're looking for internships, really go for the ones that really are where you feel like you can contribute and it's a good fit for you, given your experience, because there's so many people, the competition's high. And I mean, I was very, very fortunate. I had hope that I wasn't sure what the future was for SID. I'm still not, I mean, I try to be hopeful. Um, I found this job, I have to admit, and I mean, I'll say it. It was the only job I applied for because I wasn't really looking for a job. I didn't want to find another job. I mean, I knew in the back of the head, maybe I had to, and people knew I was impacted, we knew. And the only way I knew about this is because somebody sent me this job. And she was like, I think you'd be perfect for this. Somebody I worked with at Interaction years ago. So she sent me the job. I was like, why not? It'll allow me to update my resume. It seems like it's an interesting organization, you know. And so then I went through the whole process. It took probably about 6 months or so. And then I was offered the position. It was more of a lateral move. So that's something to think about, like, um, maybe like by I was a VP before and now I'm a director, but it's really more of when you think about the kinds of organizations. But that's things to think about, and I think that's what some people struggle with. People that have had many years of experience, at least people I know, that have 20 plus years experience, they're looking for things that are the exact equivalent of working at Chemonics or at DT Global or these big organizations and at that same salary. And it's just not, you have to make like, you know, difficult choices, because the market's not like what it was, but I don't want to be, negative because it's still, I mean, I have hope for the market, and the industry, but you can, David, what you're saying, you can pivot, I think, when you're younger, it's a lot easier. And I will say one thing around the networking thing again, I want to go back to it because when I was looking for my job when I left Interaction to Sid, I had my spreadsheet. Pat, I'm like such a I have spreadsheets and like I would tier like my job like applications. I did fewer jobs because I was more senior, like for me, I don't know, not to you, but so I applied to like 30 jobs. And I got back the three that I heard back from, you know, were jobs that I knew somebody. Like somebody sent me the link or said, "Hey, I know the head of that organization. I will make the connection," And that's those three were the only, so it's really key. And that was 7 years ago. Networking and having some sort of connection, like now it's even more critical, makes a big difference. And like you said, Pat, use us, everyone here, really come to us. That's why we're here. We want you to be successful in this industry, despite everything that's happening. Anyway, I'm sorry, I could keep going. I'll
Yeah,
shut up.
Julie, I just want to piggyback one thing, Scott. I know you have another question, but really quickly, the
Keep
field
going.
of international development, humanitarian assistance is so fluid. Even before this upheaval, it's super fluid. So one of the best advice I ever received when I was first starting out was be nice to everybody because you'll be supervising your boss tomorrow. Everything is so fluid. And so
100%.
Yeah.
oftentimes in this position, I was reporting to someone 2 levels above me. And then in my next position, I was 1 level above them. And so, I mean, things go up and down, especially as you're changing organizations and moving from activity to activity. And so that helps you, one, build your network, but it also encourages you to remain open-minded, especially when it comes to taking positions. So for me personally, I'm comfortable saying this, but moving to my current position, I had to take a $40,000 pay cut. And no one like, I didn't want to do that, but I had to be open-minded and say, hey, you know what, this is the reality.
Mhm.
And I live to fight another day, I guess. So I don't recommend that for everybody.
Can I pivot on that a little bit? One of the things that I do want you to all think about is we're talking about the network, and our networks are shared, and that's a good thing and that's a bad thing. They're saturated.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you have to think about is stepping out of your comfort zone and going someplace where you are not known, right? Going to spaces where the things that you do can translate to another field, right? I'm always telling people, if you go to a conference and you're just hanging around with the people you always hang around with, that's not getting you anything. You got to be talking to people that you don't know. You got to go to be spaces where you're not familiar so that you can talk about what you do and make sense of it. I mean, I know people, and for instance, who've worked in USAID who are now in academia and they're the director of international education at community colleges, right? That's going into a space that you weren't in before that you've made it. So one of the things to think about, yes, networking, going to the same people, and they will not say no to you. They will help you, but their space is as limited as you are. But if you say what I do and what I'm involved in from a skill set could work in Silicon Valley, okay, or in the environmental field, or in General Motors, I don't know, right? You need to think about those spaces also right now.
I'm seeing that, and that's one of the things that was intriguing, Julie, to me about what you were saying about where you are now. You're in an organization that's a bit of a funder, right? Like you're funding other kinds of organizations, right? That does point a little bit to, what the DevEx, a recent report that they put out, assessing the U.S. development job market. DevEx is like this amazing portal for global development. They pretty much any job, in the international development community is posted there. So they are able to collect a lot of data about, the job market. And, they've noticed, I mean, it's a huge precipitous drop in the posts year on year between 2024 and now. But there are like these little spots of growth here and there. Notably, there are some regional things, like there's an exodus from DC because USAID is gone. And so the USAID ecosystem of being an NGO and having to have your headquarters in DC where you can go liaise with the USAID people all the time and be all together and go to interaction working group meetings and all that stuff. That's just sort of, it's been profoundly disrupted. There are other globally focused international organizations out there, notably foundations like Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, Gates Foundation. Gates Foundation committed to spending the rest of their endowment in, I want to say, is that 10 years or 20 years? So
Yeah,
it's
I
a
think
lot.
it's
I mean,
20.
they're going to spend, I think it came to like, $8 to $9 billion a year that they're going to spend now, compared to before where they were only going to spend, obviously, a portion of their endowment. So they're gonna increase spending. It's still playing out, so foundations are gearing up. I think small NGOs that were reliant on donor funding, institutional donor funding, I think they're going to start, like you're saying, there's more jobs in in development, being fundraising, business development, writing proposals, writing grants. Think before where you only had 2 to 4 or 5 donors. Now you're going to have like 20, because you got to like canvas and reach out to all these various foundations and piece together, different bits of money to do, things that are aligned with your mission. So, but then it plays out, these projects will have to be operated, they'll have to go on, but the scope and scale, it can't possibly be the same when you've got, $40 billion coming from the US government, filtering out. It's just going to be a different world. So in my LinkedIn network, what I'm seeing is a lot of environmental jobs. That may be my algorithm is now skewing because I'm seeing them and I'm sharing them and liking them, but I'm seeing a ton of like ESG, sustainable development, climate. I think there's some good foundational funding there. In international development, I am seeing occasionally, like Tetra Tech will put out, a few things funded by USAID and things like that. There's stuff that seems to be local. But, like, David's space, the sort of like search for common ground, peace building, that kind of thing. Like, I'm not sure what's there,
I'm
Yeah.
seeing the same thing. I did a sweep of my LinkedIn this afternoon, and there were jobs from the kind of the usual suspects that we know that are still hiring. But I am seeing a lot of people do the international. But what I was struck by, what I'm seeing a lot of, are people getting new certifications. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not suggesting going
That's
back to
right.
school. So the question is, what are you spending your time doing? You're
Mhm.
not spending your day after day sending out resume after resume. And recognize you need different job, different resume. Don't use the same resume.
Never.
Change your resume for every job you apply for various reasons that would take a while to go into. But also, there are other things that you could be doing. If you find the gap is, I don't know what Pat knows in data science, what could I be doing now to take a course in order to fill that gap? Right. So I'm seeing a lot of certifications that people are taking. And of course, they're announcing it on LinkedIn. to say, oh, now I can do a this or do a that I couldn't do before.
Yeah, I'm finding the same, David. And I know people, I'm finding that people, so there's a lot of different things happening. So a lot of people are either going into coaching, which was needed for a while, but a lot of coaching that's happening, and people shifting there and getting a certificate in that space. Um, I just spoke to someone yesterday who is trying to shift, and she's doing a certificate in philanthropy. So because that's why she reached out to me, and she knew I was a SID, and she's like, "How did you shift?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I did shift, but it's, I don't know anyone in this space. I mean, not really, you know." But I was like, just call me in like 2 months from now, and I'll know more people. But I'm finding organizations at the organization level, at least at SID, right? So some shuttered, unfortunately. So the SID member, I can speak to the SID members because that's what I knew up until, just this month. A lot of them merged, some would merge, or acquired by some other bigger organization. Some of the small businesses shifted, like, they would, if they were all about trying to help organizations get funding and build partnerships with USA, they shifted and they say, oh, now, okay, what can you do with USDA? What can you do with DOD? And so other different potential donors. Or they're doing other fundraising, like, oh, where else can you go? You can go to what's the European funding mark? But going back to, it's all about funding, right? It's all about like money,
Follow the money. Follow the
yeah.
money.
And then I think like the big organizations, they're just shifting, right? Like I think Kamanic, I can't speak to Kamanic, but I've heard they're just regionally, Middle East that's where you're going, because that's where money is. So it's been really, I mean, I think people, you know, we're adaptable. I mean, it's still hard though, but yeah, anyway, it's been interesting to
True.
see people shift.
Yeah, I mean, people are shifting, and this is another point I wanted to mention. Another piece of good advice I received was create your own LLC. For those of you who don't know what an LLC is, just go out, Google it, ChatGPT it, create your LLC. A lot of UN agencies and local NGOs in particular are just hiring on consultants, because it can be really challenging to bring someone on full time with benefits and everything else. And so they're hiring short term, 3, 6, 9, 12-month consultants. And then it's a little bit easier to enter that space when you have an LLC set up and you're your own kind of business. And so I have known a lot of people I'm in my 30s, and so I've met a lot of people late 20s, early 30s who are kind of going that route to say, hey, I have a little bit of experience, but not enough to get a senior role as a VP or a director doing XYZ, but I can do this consultant thing for a little while. And then a lot of those consultancies, especially within the UN organization, they kind of parlay themselves into a full-time position. You do 2 rounds of consultancies and they say, hey, you know what? You're pretty gosh darn good at this. Let me give you a full-time contract. And so definitely look into that. And just also for any Americans out there, it's LLC is super good for tax liability as well. So definitely recommend that.
That's a huge point. I appreciate you bringing that up, Pat. Like, couple NGOs I've run into in my life, like when I worked at IRD, which is now Bluemont. When I worked there in 2008, they were 10 years old. They had basically been a consult. It was very founder driven. This guy, Arthur Keyes, and his wife Yasna, they formed this company. It was like Keyes and Associates, right? And then it was like they were a consulting firm. They were just their own LLC doing consulting on community stabilization projects and things like that. And they got more work and more work and more work. And then they're like, wow, this should be an NGO. Same, and so that kind of thing can happen, especially now. We're in a space right now where it's kind of like that no one's figuring out, everyone's figuring out what's going on. There's an enormous amount of change depending on, whatever presidential transitions happen in the next few years, if there's, a rebuilding one direction or the other, we don't know what's going to happen. But, you can strike gold. I mean, another NGO that's a good example of that is Bixal, Bixal. Really good big NGO founded by someone from the Middlebury Institute, actually, a Ms. alumni, Carla Briseno. She formed, this nonprofit, or this, I think it was a consulting firm to do projects, and just grew and got bigger and bigger, and they got bigger things. And now they're a diversified government contractor. It's very fascinating. We have a couple questions in the chat, it looks like, that have come through. Zephyr, thank you for your question. Says, any advice specifically for current graduate students with international experience, but no experience in international development yet, looking to get in the field?
I answered that in the chat.
Oh, did you? Oh, yeah.
But let me say, don't look at international development now. Maybe, right? Maybe you ought to be looking at international, how it applies in other ways, right? In other sectors, right?
Like
So
mission-driven work, you're saying?
mission-driven work. I mean, you may be looking at corporations. You may be looking at the Deloittes of the world and those kind of places. You may be looking at higher education. You may be looking at state government. Think about all these state governments that got these international partnerships. In Maryland, I think half the governor, lieutenant governor were like in Korea last week or something like that, right? That all these states have these nation partnerships, right? That they need people involved in. I'm often surprised that international development, humanitarian work, relief work, all these fields have components on the state level that people don't think about. They translate on the state level. So think about it that way.
Especially in disaster response, in the humanitarian space.
Especially if FEMA's going to go away, yes.
Yeah, geez, God help us. But like,
oh yeah, I heard the Center for Disaster Philanthropy received like a crazy, like a $40 million. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I don't know what they might have interns.
Yeah, so my last year, before I worked here, when I was working for CRS, Catholic Relief Services, and just even before, like working for Relief International before that, it's very evident, in the humanitarian space for acute humanitarian disasters, that is still a thing. I mean, those big NGOs, you can raise a ton of money, sadly, only from natural disasters. So like literally right now, Melissa tearing through the Caribbean, hitting Jamaica and Cuba and, other Caribbean islands and things like that. You see World Central Kitchens there. They're probably, raising tons and tons of money. The Red Cross in America, like whenever something happens, like the fires in California. So like you're saying, David, about, domestic emergency and, response and things like that. Yes, for sure. California is all over that. The California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, sort of like the California version of FEMA. Other states have their own version of the same thing. Definitely in that humanitarian disaster response space, that is still definitely an avenue where there can be some level of normalcy. It's not going to be the same because the complex humanitarian disasters are going to be chronically underfunded compared to the way they were before. Like, what's going on in Darfur right now, typically there would have been, multiple international development, UN funded, Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance funded entities there, out there. There should be DART teams. There should be like 5 DART teams active around the world right now.
One thing I want to say on the humanitarian side for people who are just graduating and trying to figure out what comes next, I highly recommend getting like an EMT paramedic certification. I'm more on the humanitarian side of things, so I don't necessarily do the international development stuff. I'm more on the humanitarian, and so if you can say, "Hey, I'm an EMT paramedic," you only need 6 months of training to become an EMT. Paramedic's like a year. And you can go to someone like Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm interested in this management role. P.S. I'm an EMT or paramedic, and I have all this experience." That communicates that, one, you know to take care of yourself. 2, you generate value. And 3, you have hands-on experience. And so I know a few people who are going that route, particularly for the humanitarian side of things, which is a little bit different from development, admittedly, but yeah, huge.
Yeah. Yeah, Red Cross as well. Thanks for putting that in the chat, Pat. Yeah, Red Cross is literally everywhere. I mean, every single county in America, there's a Red Cross and you can volunteer for them. And in many cases, they have someone there who's teaching some version of the, humanitarian law class, and you can take some of their certifications and you can get on rosters and, get practice, supporting people that are recovering from various localized disasters like fires or earthquakes or floods or
I would
that
highly
kind of thing.
recommend CERT training if anybody's familiar with CERT.
Yes.
Go ahead, right?
Mm.
Community emergency response team. This is community training, right? Couple weekends. Yeah. And Scott knows you've heard of CERT training. Yeah, do something like that.
Yeah, it's funny when you look up CERT training, everything that comes up are localized to wherever you are. So like when I did CERT, everything that came up for me was literally like my local communities, so wherever you are, that's going to come up. So that's definitely a way to go.
So Catherine had this question about taking a demotion, which
Yes. Thank you.
that's an interesting, I go back to like what Pat started at the beginning or said earlier, like how every career is not like a straight path. It's all just, it moves and people make decisions and go to different places for different reasons. And I think that like as long as you can indicate why, why you made that decision and what you learned from going into that position, after you leave there, and how you made a difference and how you grew. I think people will understand that and respect that. And I think, I don't know, I just found, like, I remember when I left, I always felt that I always should be moving up, always, and I don't know, like maybe it's just what my family instilled. My parents was like, no, we've got to keep moving up, moving up. And when I came to Sid, it was actually also a, a parallel move. And, I kept looking for higher level, like VP, because I was a director. And then I realized that it actually, in retrospect, it was the best thing for me, at that time, because I had a young daughter and, but I didn't make all that connection. Oh, actually, it wasn't until my boss, she was like, well, we can't pay you but at the amount that you're making interaction. But, I remember when I was in a similar situation once and, how would you feel about going to 4 days a week, like instead? And I was like, and you can work remotely. This was way before, the pandemic. And I was like, Heather, let me think about that, and I felt like, once I weighed out I was like, I think this is actually a better thing for me in my life right now. So I just think that it doesn't always have to be you're moving up and making more money. Yeah. I don't know if Pat and David have anything to add to that question.
I would agree with Julie wholeheartedly. We are fixated in Washington with titles, right? And because we're always trying to equate, well, I was a director here. What does that mean in government? What does that mean here? I was a GS 12. What does that mean? We're kind of fixated with that. And it's amazing in Washington how many directors are directors of nothing just because they're giving the title director because you got to make me a director for me to stay. So they direct nothing, but they have the title director.
They're
Don't get
director
fixated.
of one
Yeah,
themselves.
don't get fixated on that. Julie's right. Don't get fixated on that because it's the work itself that matters. And we have to also consider, you got kids, you've got other things going on. You can't keep moving head and head and head. You'll drive yourself crazy, right? And then you'll be in trouble health-wise if you focus on that too much.
I appreciate that. So we're almost to time. Pat, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
Please.
second what David mentioned. I mean, it really is, especially in this field, it's the work that matters. It really is the work that matters. Develop your talent, develop your skills, dig deep into whatever technical skill set you want to go into. But that's going to be the most important thing. I found I used to work in healthcare. Healthcare, we were all about director of this, that, boom, 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 especially insurance firm. Within the humanitarian sector, it's more geared towards what can you do, what have you done, and what do you have the potential to do again, right? I partnered with Interaction now with CRS, and we were pushing some advocacy points for the Global Fragility Act (GFA), and looking at all these advocacy positions. It's like, all right, so what have you done before? Can you push this? Do I feel comfortable with you pushing this now? And so it's much more oriented on the work. And I think that that's what motivates us. We're all mission driven. We all want to do a good job. And so focus there, and do stuff that makes you happy.
Cool.
Oh,
Thank you,
there was a
Pat.
question about more events like this. I do have to push SID US, even though I'm no longer there.
Right on, yeah.
I do think you all should check out SID US because it is, you know, they do have a lot of programming for young professionals and students because that's a really key group of theirs. They do have internships, you know, and it is an entree into learning about other organizations working in the space. And then, so you should check them out. And if you are interested, if they go to their website or if you need a connection, let me know. But they're all very approachable. And then they do have events, you know, like,
Like
I
the
mean,
Young
big
Nonprofit
events.
or the Young Professionals Network.
Yeah, so they have the Young Professionals Network, but they have, so if anyone's in DC, you know, they have like big events like every once in a while, like their conference. I mean, this year
Mhm.
was a little different, but they're going to definitely have one in the spring. They're having a kind of a dinner not a dinner, I'm sorry. It's a reception. It usually is a dinner, but they're changing it in November. So they're always looking for volunteers just to help with those events. So if you can't commit, but if you're in town, that does require in town, those two those events. But they have a lot of other stuff too. So just definitely check them out and feel free to also connect with me on LinkedIn. Thanks, Scott
That's
and Pat
awesome.
and David.
Yeah, this is great. This has been really a great panel. I really appreciate you guys' time. I know, this has been a really difficult moment for our field. I think traditional pathways are just not the same as they were, like a year ago. But I really think there's a new path forward. I think, motivated, mission-driven people, if you hustle and you network and you are targeted and intentional and honest with yourself, I think, there's still some opportunities out there to do some really cool, impactful work that's going to help a lot of people. You just have to find out, where you want to go, what you're open to doing, what you can do, what you want to learn, that kind of thing. So, but, I think a lot of the fundamentals are still the same, I love that Pat said, don't be mean to anyone. You never know. This is a small world. You're going to run into people. Everyone, what goes around comes around. So, keep appreciative, keep professional, keep faith in yourself. And I think, we're going to get through this. So I'm going to stop recording, and this recording will go out to everyone who RSVP'd. Yeah, so thank you guys for coming.
My pleasure. I'm glad to have been invited. I wish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
Thanks,
you,
David,
Scott.
Julie, and
Cheers.
Pat.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, Pat. Hopefully our paths will cross again.
I think we might have already met, maybe